1947. A Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a dark cave near the Dead Sea. The sound that echoed back changed archaeology forever. He had discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient texts that would revolutionize our understanding of religion and history. But 5 years later, archaeologists found something different in Cave 3. Not parchment, not papyrus, copper. When they finally cut it open, the metal scroll revealed something no one expected. A treasure map. 64 locations, specific directions, estimated value, over 4,600 talents of gold and silver. In modern terms, more than $3 billion worth of treasure hidden somewhere in the Judean desert. For over 70 years, no one has found a single coin. Tonight, we're following the money trail through the Dead Sea Caves, where ancient economics, religious power, and the greatest treasure hunt in history intersect. Welcome to the Wealth Timeline, where we uncover how money, power, and history intertwine to shape the world we live in. Late 1946 or early 1947. The exact timing remains debated, but the story is consistent. Muhammad Edh-Dib, a Bedouin shepherd of the Ta'amire tribe, was searching for a stray goat near Khirbet Qumran on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. He threw a stone into a cave opening and heard the sound of breaking pottery. Inside, he found cylindrical clay jars, unique vessels unknown elsewhere in the archaeological record. 7 scrolls were carefully stored inside. He had no idea he'd just made the most significant manuscript discovery of the 20th century. By 1947, scholars identified the scrolls as ancient Jewish texts dating to the Second Temple period. Professor Eleazar Sukenik of Hebrew University recognized their significance immediately. In a clandestine meeting at the British divided military zone of Jerusalem, he examined fragments through barbed wire. Ancient Hebrew text written on animal skin, perfectly preserved by the Dead Sea's arid climate. Over the next decade, between 1947 and 1956, archaeologists and Bedouin treasure hunters discovered fragments and scrolls in 11 caves around Qumran. The collection eventually totaled approximately 15,000 fragments, representing about 981 different manuscripts. The texts revolutionized biblical scholarship. Here were copies of every book of the Hebrew Bible except Esther, some dating to the 3rd century BCE, 1,000 years older than any previously known Hebrew manuscripts. But the religious texts also revealed something unexpected: detailed evidence of complex economic organization. The community rule scroll described a sect that practiced shared wealth. Members surrendered their property to communal ownership upon joining. Wealthy individuals entering the community brought substantial assets. The Damascus document outlined regulations for economic transactions, oaths regarding property, and rules governing commerce. This wasn't just a religious community. It was an economic system. Then, in March 1952, archaeologists entered Cave 3. On a shelf carved into the wall, they found something that didn't fit the pattern at all: 2 rolls of copper, completely oxidized, too brittle to unroll without destroying them. For 5 years, experts debated how to open them. Finally, the Jordanian government sent them to Manchester University's College of Technology in England. Between 1955 and 1956, engineers cut the copper into 23 strips using a miniature circular saw. What they read changed everything. The copper scroll wasn't scripture, it wasn't poetry, it wasn't prophecy, it was an inventory. 64 entries, each describing a location, each specifying treasure: silver, gold, vessels, priestly vestments, sacred objects. Column 1. Entry 1. In the ruin that is in the valley of Achor, under the steps with the entrance at the east, a distance of 40 cubits, a strong box of silver and its vessels with a weight of 17 talents. Column 2. Entry 1. In the salt pit that is under the steps, 41 talents of silver. Entry 12. In the cave of the old washer's chamber, on the 3rd terrace, 65 ingots of gold. One entry alone described 900 talents, approximately 30 tons of silver, buried in a single location. Total inventory, over 4,600 talents of precious metal. A talent ranged between 25 and 75 pounds, depending on the period and region. Using conservative estimates, the copper scroll describes between 58 and 174 tons of gold and silver. Modern value estimates range from $1 billion to over $3 billion. Some scholars, calculating by weight and current precious metal prices, suggest the figure could exceed that considerably. But here's what made the discovery truly extraordinary. The copper scroll was fundamentally different from every other Dead Sea text. Material: 99% pure copper, alloyed with 1% tin. Every other scroll used parchment or papyrus. Copper was expensive, difficult to work, and reserved for documents meant to last millennia. Language: written in Mishnaic Hebrew, the colloquial language of the period, rather than the formal, literary Hebrew of the religious texts. It included Greek loanwords and technical terminology absent from biblical literature. Content: purely utilitarian. No theology, no philosophy, just locations, measurements, and quantities. Writing method: the text was incised, stamped or pressed into the copper rather than written with ink. This required specialized tools and significant effort. Someone went to extraordinary expense to create this document. They used valuable metal, specialized craftsmanship, and precise language. They listed specific locations that would be meaningful only to people with intimate local knowledge. References like the salt pit that is under the steps or the old washer's chamber assumed the reader knew exactly what these landmarks meant. The question became inescapable. Who created this? And what was the treasure? The prevailing theories focused on three possibilities. Theory 1. The treasure belonged to the Qumran community itself, possibly the Essenes, a Jewish sect described by ancient historians as living ascetically near the Dead Sea. But this theory had problems. The amounts were staggering, far beyond what a small ascetic community could accumulate. Historical sources described the Essenes as renouncing private property and living in poverty. The community rule scroll confirmed they practiced shared ownership of limited resources. Theory 2. The treasure came from the Second Temple in Jerusalem. This made more sense. The temple collected the half-shekel tax from Jews throughout the diaspora. Josephus, the first-century historian, reported that in the 30s CE, many tens of thousands of Babylonian Jews guarded convoys taking the temple tax to Jerusalem. The temple accumulated enormous wealth through taxation, offerings, and donations from pilgrims. Timing supported this theory. Most scholars date the copper scroll to between 25 and 75 CE, with strong evidence pointing to around 70 CE, precisely when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple during the First Jewish Revolt. If priests anticipated the Roman siege, they would have had motive to hide the temple treasury. The scroll's references to priestly vestments and tithing vessels suggested temple origin. But here's the problem. Josephus explicitly stated that the main temple treasure remained in the building when it fell to the Romans. The Romans didn't just destroy the temple, they looted it systematically. Theory 3. The treasure was hidden during the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132–135 CE, when Jewish refugees fled to the Judean wilderness to escape Roman forces. Evidence shows people sheltered at Qumran and nearby caves during this period. They could have hidden the copper scroll then, but if the scroll was deposited that late, it couldn't have originated with the Qumran community because the Romans had already destroyed the settlement decades earlier in 68 CE. Each theory had evidence, each had problems, and then there was the final uncomfortable possibility. The treasure never existed at all. The copper scroll was fiction, legend, or symbolic. But that theory faced its own challenge. Why carve a fantasy onto expensive copper? Why use such precise terminology and measurements? No treasure from the copper scroll has ever been verified as recovered. But in 2013, researcher Jim Barfield, a former Oklahoma fire investigator, claimed he'd identified exact locations matching the scroll's descriptions. Using historical maps, aerial photographs, and topographical analysis, Barfield triangulated potential sites near Qumran. He petitioned Israeli authorities for excavation permits. They were denied. The area is religiously and politically sensitive. Unauthorized digging is prohibited, and Israel's Antiquities Authority has stringent protocols for archaeological work. So the mystery persists. But what the Copper Scroll reveals about ancient finance is more valuable than any treasure. Modern archaeology now recognizes that Qumran wasn't the isolated religious commune scholars once believed. 2,000 years ago, the Dead Sea region supported thriving commercial activity. Settlements dotted the shore. Ships plied the sea carrying salt and bitumen. Valuable resources used in construction and waterproofing. Date palms and plants produced resins used in perfume manufacture. Recent discoveries from caves beyond Qumran, particularly the Bar Kokhba refuge caves from the 132-135 CE revolt, contained financial documents, legal contracts, military records, and personal correspondence. These texts provide evidence of sophisticated economic organization during periods of crisis. The Bar Kokhba era text is a silver tetradrachm coin featuring the facade of the Jerusalem temple with the inscription, "For the freedom of Jerusalem." Even during revolt, financial symbolism invoked temple authority. The Dead Sea texts collectively demonstrate that ancient Jewish economic life was far more complex than previously understood. The scrolls reveal taxation systems, regular temple taxes, tithes, offerings, currency exchange, international commerce requiring conversion, property law, regulations governing ownership, inheritance, transactions, contract enforcement, legal mechanisms for commercial agreements, communal economics, shared wealth systems alongside private property, treasury management, sophisticated protocols for asset protection. And here's the unexpected modern parallel. Central banks today maintain gold reserves in distributed locations, use detailed inventories, implement security protocols, and create redundant documentation, exactly the principles evidenced in the Copper Scroll. The Federal Reserve stores gold in multiple facilities. Documentation is meticulous, security is multi-layered. Disaster recovery plans exist for crisis scenarios. The fundamental principles of treasury management haven't changed in 2,000 years. What has changed is technology. Ancient priests used copper scrolls. Modern systems use encrypted databases. But the core function, securing assets, maintaining records, enabling future recovery, remains identical. The Copper Scroll also reveals the relationship between religion and economics in ways that challenge modern assumptions. Today, we separate sacred and financial institutions. Banks aren't temples, churches don't operate as central banks. But in ancient Jerusalem, those functions were unified. The temple was simultaneously religious center, tax authority, currency exchange, asset repository, legal arbiter for commercial disputes. Control of the temple meant control of the entire economic system, and that's why the Romans destroyed it so thoroughly in 70 CE. They weren't just eliminating a religious symbol, they were dismantling the financial infrastructure of Jewish society. The Copper Scroll's treasure, whether it existed, whether it was found and never reported, whether it still waits beneath the Judean desert, represents more than gold and silver. It represents the economic power of the Second Temple. The wealth that flowed through Jerusalem from throughout the Jewish diaspora. The financial sophistication of ancient societies we've consistently underestimated. 3 things to understand about the financial secrets in the Dead Sea Scrolls. First, the Copper Scroll demonstrates that ancient economic systems were far more sophisticated than popular imagination suggests. Detailed inventories, distributed asset storage, durable record keeping, coded insider information. These aren't modern innovations, they're ancient protocols. The priests managing the Second Temple treasury understood risk management, disaster planning, and information security. They created a system designed to survive catastrophe. Second, money and power have always been inseparable from religious authority. Today we assume separation between church and state, between financial and spiritual institutions. But for most of human history, those systems were unified. Controlling the temple meant controlling taxation, currency, and commerce. Understanding this connection reveals why religious conflicts were simultaneously economic conflicts. The destruction of the temple in 70 CE wasn't just spiritual devastation, it was economic collapse. Third, some mysteries are more valuable unsolved. The Copper Scroll has sparked 70 years of scholarship, debate, archaeological investigation, and popular fascination. It has revealed more about ancient finance through what it tells us about record-keeping, wealth management, and institutional organization than any single treasure discovery could provide. The search has uncovered dozens of other significant archaeological sites. The analysis has revolutionized understanding of Second Temple Judaism. Whether or not the treasure is ever found, the scroll itself is the real discovery. The Dead Sea Scrolls collectively represent one of the most important archaeological finds in history. They've revolutionized biblical scholarship, illuminated ancient Judaism, and provided unprecedented insight into the period when both Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism emerged. But among those 981 manuscripts, among those 15,000 fragments, the Copper Scroll stands alone. Not because it's the oldest, not because it contains the most profound theology, but because it reveals something scholars once thought impossible to discover: how money actually moved through the ancient world, who controlled it, how they protected it, what systems they created to manage it, and how sophisticated those systems truly were. In 1947, a shepherd threw a stone into a cave. The echo revealed ancient scriptures that changed religious history. In 1952, archaeologists found copper hidden on a shelf. The text revealed ancient economics that changed how we understand power itself. Some say the treasure is still out there, buried beneath olive groves, hidden in cisterns, sealed in caves whose entrances collapsed 2 millennia ago. Others say the treasure was found long ago, melted down, redistributed, its origins forgotten. But the real treasure was never the gold and silver listed on the scroll. The real treasure was what the scroll told us about who we are. Because in the timeline of wealth, every system, ancient or modern, runs on the same foundations: control, documentation, and the eternal question of who decides what has value. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserved that truth in copper, and copper, unlike parchment, lasts forever. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the Wealth Timeline, and turn on the bell icon, because history's next secret is already unfolding.